The pond in winter. After a still winter night, I awoke with the impression that some question had been put to me, which I had been endeavoring in vain to answer in my sleep. As what, how, when, where. But there was dawning nature, in whom all creatures live, looking in my broad window with a sense, oops, with serene and satisfied face, and no question on her lips. I awoke to an answered question, to nature and to daylight. The snow, lying deep on the earth, dotted with young pines, and the very slope of the hill on which my house is placed, seemed to say, "Forward! Nature puts no question and answers, none which we mortals ask. She has long ago taken her resolution. O Prince, our eyes contemplate with admiration and transmit to the soul the wonderful and varied spectacle of this universe. The night veils without doubt a part of this glorious creation, but day comes to reveal to us this great work, which extends from earth even into the plains of the ether. Then to my morning work. First I take an axe and pail and go in search of water, if that be not a dream. After a cold and snowy night, it needed a divining rod to find it. Every winter, the liquid and trembling surface of the pond, which was so sensitive to every breath and reflected every light and shadow, becomes solid to the depth of a foot or a foot and a half, so that it will support the heaviest teams, and perchance the snow covers it to an equal depth, and it is not to be distinguished from any level field. Like the marmots in the surrounding hills, it closes its eyelids and becomes dormant for 3 months or more. Standing on the snow-covered plain, as if in a pasture amid the hills, I cut my way first through a foot of snow, and then a foot of ice, and open a window under my feet where kneeling to drink. I look down into the quiet parlor of the fishes, pervaded by a softened light as though a window of ground glass, with its bright sanded floor, the same as in summer. There a perennial waveless serenity reigns as in the amber twilight sky, corresponding to the cool and even temperament of the inhabitants. Heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads. Early in the morning, while all things are crisp with frost, men come with fishing reels and slender lunch and let down their fine lines through the snowy field to take pickerel and perch. Wild men who instinctively follow other fashions and trust other authorities than their townsmen, and by their goings and comings stitch towns together in parts where else they would be ripped. They sit and eat their luncheon in stout fear-nots on the dry oak leaves on the shore, as wise in natural lore as the citizen is in artificial. They never consulted with books, and know and can tell much less than they have done. The things which they practice are said not yet to be known. Here is one fishing for pickerel with grown perch for bait. You look into his pail with wonder as into a summer pond, as if he kept summer locked up at home, or knew where she had retreated. How, pray, did he get those in midwinter? Oh, he got worms out of the rotten logs, since the ground froze, and so he caught them. His life itself passes deeper in nature than the studies of the naturalist penetrate, himself a subject for the naturalist. The latter raises the moss and bark gently with his knife in search of insects. The former lays open logs to their core with his axe, and moss and bark fly far and wide. He gets his living by barking trees. Such a man has some right to fish, and I love to see nature carried out in him. The perch swallows the grub worm, the pickerel swallows the perch, and the fisherman swallows the pickerel. And so all the chinks in the scale of being are filled. When I strolled around the pond in misty weather, I was sometimes amused by the primitive mode which some ruder fisherman had adopted. He would perhaps have placed alder branches over the narrow holes in the ice, which were 4 or 5 rods apart and an equal distance from the shore, and having fastened the end of the line to a stick to prevent its being pulled through, have passed the slack line over a twig of the alder, a foot or more above the ice, and tied a dry oak leaf to it, which, being pulled down, would show when he had a bite. These alders loomed through the mist as regular intervals as you walked halfway round the pond. Ah, the pickerel of Walden. When I see them lying on the ice, or in the well which the fisherman cuts in the ice, making a little hole to admit the water, I am always surprised by their rare beauty, as if they were fabulous fishes. They are so foreign to the streets, even to the woods, foreign as Arabia to our Concord life. They possess a quite dazzling and transcendent beauty which separates them by a wide interval from the cadaverous cod and haddock, whose fame is trumpeted in our streets. They are not green like the pines, not gray like the stones, nor blue like the sky, but they have, to my eyes, if possible, yet rarer colors, like flowers and precious stones, as if they were the pearls, the animalized nuclei or crystals of the Walden water. They, of course, are Walden all over and all through, are themselves small Waldens in the animal kingdom. Waldenses. It is surprising that they are caught here, that in this deep and capacious spring, far beneath the rattling teams and chaises and tinkling sleighs that travel the Walden road, this great gold and emerald fish swims. I never chanced to see its kind in any market. It would be the cynosure of all eyes there, easily, with a few convulsive quirks. They give up their watery ghosts like a mortal translated before his time to the thin air of heaven. As I was desirous to recover the long-lost bottom of Walden Pond, I surveyed it carefully before the ice broke up early in '46 with compass and chain and sounding line. There have been many stories told about the bottom, or rather no bottom, of this pond, which certainly had no foundation for themselves. It is remarkable how long men will believe in the bottomlessness of a pond without taking the trouble to sound it. I have visited 2 such bottomless ponds in one walk in this neighborhood. Many have believed that Walden reached quite through to the other side of the globe. Some who have lain flat on the ice for a long time, looking down through the elusive medium, perchance with watery eyes into the bargain, and driven to hasty conclusions by the fear of catching cold in their breasts, have seen vast holes into which a load of hay might be driven. If there were anybody to drive it, the undoubted source of the Styx and entrance to the infernal regions from these parts. Others have gone down from the village with a 56 and a wagon load of inch rope, but yet have failed to find any bottom for which the 56 was resting by the way. They were paying out the rope in the vain attempt to fathom their truly immeasurable capacity for marvelousness. But I can assure my readers that Walden has a reasonably tight bottom at a not unreasonable, though at an unusual depth. I fathomed it easily with a cod line and a stone weighing about 1.5 pounds, and could tell accurately when the stone left the bottom by having to pull so much harder before the water got underneath to help me. The greatest depth was exactly 102 feet. To which may be added the 5 feet which it had risen since, making 107. This is a remarkable depth for so small an area, yet not an inch of it can be spared by the imagination. What if all ponds were shallow? Would it not react on the minds of men? I am thankful that this pond was made deep and pure for a symbol. While men believe in the infinite, some ponds will be thought to be bottomless. A factory owner, hearing what depth I had found, thought that it could not be true, for judging from his acquaintance with dams, sand would not lie at so deep an angle. But the deepest ponds are not so deep in proportion to their area as most suppose, and if drained would not leave very, very remarkable valleys. They are not like cups between the hills, for this one, which is so unusually deep for its area, appears in a vertical section through its center, not deeper than a shallow plate. Most ponds emptied would leave a meadow, no more hollow than we frequently see. William Gilpin, who is so admirable in all that relates to landscape, and usually so correct, standing at the head of Loch Fyne in Scotland, which he describes as a bay of salt water 60 or 70 fathoms deep, 4 miles in breadth, and about 50 miles long, surrounded by mountains, observes, "If we could have seen it immediately after the diluvian crash, or whatever convulsion of nature occasioned it, before the waters gushed in, what a horrid chasm must it have appeared." Wait a minute. Okay. So high as heaved the two mid-hills, so low down sunk a hollow bottom, broad and deep, capacious bed of waters. But if using the shortest diameter of Loch Fyne, we apply these proportions to Walden, which, as we have seen, appears already in a vertical section only like a shallow plate, it will appear 4 times as shallow. So much for the increased horrors of the chasm of Loch Fyne when emptied. No doubt many a smiling valley with its stretching cornfields occupies exactly such a horrid chasm from which the waters have receded, though it requires the insight and the farsight of the geologist to convince the unsuspecting inhabitants of this fact. Often an inquisitive eye may detect the shores of a primitive lake in the low horizon hills, and no subsequent elevation of the plain have been necessary to conceal their history. But it is easiest, as they who work on the highways know, to find the hollows by the puddles after a shower. The amount of it is, the imagination, give it the least license, dives deeper and soars higher than nature goes. So probably the depth of the ocean will be found to be very inconsiderable compared with its breadth. As I sounded through the ice, I could determine the shape of the bottom with greater accuracy than is possible in surveying harbors which do not freeze over, and I was surprised at its general regularity. In the deepest part, there are several acres more level than almost any field which is exposed to the sun, wind, and plow. In one instance, on a line arbitrarily chosen, the depth did not vary more than 1 foot and 30 rods, and generally near the middle. I could calculate the variation for each 100 feet in any direction beforehand within 3 or 4 inches. Some are accustomed to speak of deep and dangerous holes, even in quiet sandy ponds like this. But the effect of water under these circumstances is to level all inequalities. The regularity of the bottom and its conformity to the shores and the range of the neighboring hills were so perfect that a distant promontory betrayed itself in the soundings quite across the pond, and its direction could be determined by observing the opposite shore. Cape becomes bar and plain shoal, and valley and gorge, deep water and channel.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot.
It is. When I had mapped the pond by the scale of 10 rods to an inch and put down the soundings, more than 100 in all, I observed this remarkable coincidence, having noticed that the number indicating the greatest depth was apparently in the center of the map. I laid a rule on the map lengthwise and then breadthwise, and found to my surprise that the line of greatest length intersected the line of greatest breadth exactly at the point of greatest depth. Notwithstanding that the middle is so nearly level, the outline of the pond, far from regular, and the extreme length and breadth were got by measuring into the coves and I said to myself, who knows but this hint would conduct to the deepest part of the ocean as well as of a pond or puddle? Is not this the rule also for the height of mountains regarded as the opposite of valleys? We know that a hill is not highest at its narrowest part. Okay. Of 5 coves, 3 or all which had been sounded were observed to have a bar quite across their mouths and deeper water within, so that the bay tended to be an expansion of water within the land, not only horizontally but vertically, and to form a basin or independent pond, the direction of the 2 capes showing the course of the bar. Every harbor on the seacoast also has its bar at its entrance. In proportion as the mouth of the cove was wider compared with its length, the water over the bar was deeper compared with that in the basin. Given then the length and breadth of the cove and the character of the surrounding shore, and you have almost elements enough to make out a formula for all cases. In order to see how nearly I could guess, with this experience at the deepest point in a pond by observing the outlines of its surfaces and the character of its shores alone, I made a plan of White Pond, which contains about 41 acres and, like this, has no island in it, nor any visible inlet or outlet, and as the line of greatest breadth fell very near the line of least breadth, where 2 opposite capes approached each other and 2 opposite bays receded. I ventured to mark a point a short distance from the latter line, but still on the line of greatest length as the deepest. The deepest part was found to be within 100 feet of this, still farther in the direction to which I had inclined, and was only 1 foot deeper, namely 60 feet. Of course, a stream running through or an island in the pond would make the problem much more complicated. If we knew all the laws of nature, we should need only one fact, or the description of one actual phenomenon, to infer all the particular results at that point. Now we know only a few laws, and our result is vitiated, not, of course, by any confusion or irregularity in nature, but by our ignorance of essential elements in the calculation. Our notions of law and harmony are commonly confined to those instances which we detect. But the harmony which results from a far greater number of seemingly conflicting but really concurring laws which we have not detected is still more wonderful. Particular laws are as our points of view as to the traveler. A mountain outline varies with every step, and it has an infinite number of profiles through absolutely but one form. Even when cleft or bored through, it is not comprehended in its entireness. What I have observed of the pond is no less true in ethics. It is the law of average. Such a rule of the 2 diameters not only guides us toward the sun in the system and the heart in the man, but draws lines through the length and breadth of the aggregate of man's particular daily behaviors and waves of life into his coves and inlets, and where they intersect will be the height or depth of his character. Okay, I'm going to reread. What I have observed of the pond is no less true in ethics. It is the law of average. Such a rule of the 2 diameters not only guides us toward the sun in the system and the heart in man, but draws lines through the length and breadth of the aggregate of man's particular daily behaviors and waves of life into his coves and inlets, and where they intersect will be the height or depth of his character. Perhaps we need only to know how his shores trend in his adjacent country or circumstances to infer his depth and concealed bottom. If he is surrounded by mountainous circumstances, an Achillean shore, whose peaks overshadow and are reflected in his bosom, they suggest a corresponding depth in him. But a low and smooth shore proves him shallow on that side. In our bodies, a bold, projecting brow falls off too and indicates a corresponding depth of thought. Also, there is a bar across the entrance of our every cove, our particular inclination. Each is our harbor for a season, in which we are detained and partially landlocked. These inclinations are not whimsically unusual. These inclinations are not whimsical usually, but their form, size, and direction are determined by the promontories of the shore, the ancient axis of elevation. When this bar is gradually increased by storms, tides, or currents, or there is a subsidence of the waters, so that it reaches to the surface, that which was at first but an inclination in the shore, and which I thought was harbored, becomes an individual lake, cut off from the ocean, wherein the thought secures its own conditions, changes perhaps from salt to fresh, becomes a sweet sea, Dead Sea, or a marsh. At the advent of each individual into this life, may we not suppose that such a bar has risen to the surface somewhere. It is true, we are such poor navigators that our thoughts, for the most part, stand off and on upon a harborless coast, are conversant only with the bights of the bays of Posey, or steer for the public ports of entry, and go into the dry docks of science, where they merely refit for this world, and so natural currents concur to their individual theme.